Detroit-style pizza is all thanks to one woman, a waitress named Connie Picinato, who worked at a little restaurant in Detroit called Buddy's back in 1946. Now, having spent much of her childhood in Sicily, she really missed those thick, chewy pieces of focaccia from her youth, so she convinced Buddy's owner, Gus, to help her recreate it. So they topped it with some cheese and just a little bit of tomato sauce, and it was a huge hit, putting Buddy's on the map as the home of Detroit-style pizza. And Brian, you actually went there to learn how to make it from the originators.
That's right. And part of their key to success is this blue steel pan.
Okay.
These were originally made in the 1930s and 40s by a company called Dover's Parkersburg. And they were scrap metal pans used by the assembly workers in the automotive industry. And they would hold nuts and bolts and scrap metal while they built the cars.
So from the auto mechanic shop to the kitchen, how'd that work out?
Well, it worked out pretty well because after repeated use, these pans get really well seasoned, like a well-used cast iron pan. So eventually you were able to get a nice crispy crust and a lacy cheese edge, which is key to Buddy's Pizza.
Now I have to say, it looks very similar to our classic 9x13 baking pan. I mean, even down to the folded edges.
That's right, but there's one distinct difference here. You'll see on the inside of this pan, the folded metal is on the inside rather than just on the outside.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where a lot of the grease would collect from the cheese.
A little nook.
And you get this fried, crispy corner, and you still get that today. Some of the pans they use at Buddy's are 50, 75 years old.
Oh, I bet they're pretty valuable.
They're very valuable. So that's a hard pan to come by these days. So we're turning to our trusty 13 by 9-inch baking pan. This is a non-stick pan, but we've gone ahead and sprayed it with a little bit of non-stick vegetable spray. And that's really just to keep the cheese from sticking to the edge. And just to develop that well-worn patina and that seasoned blue steel effect, we're gonna add 1 tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil and just brush it around all up in the sides and into the corners of the pan.
And actually, that's not that unusual. If you think about making pan pizza, you usually put a little extra oil into the pan.
That's right. Okay, so the pan is seasoned, and we can turn our attention to the dough.
All right.
Now you should think of this as a Neapolitan-style dough with a Sicilian assembly baked in a Detroit scrap metal pan.
So it's thick and a little doughy with crisp edges.
That's right. So we have 2 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour. To that, we're going to add 1 1/2 teaspoons of sugar and 1 1/2 teaspoons of instant or rapid rise yeast. And then we're going to whisk that together. It's easier to whisk this together to incorporate rather than hooking on the dough mixer there.
Yep.
And then we're going to set it onto the mixer. And we'll turn the mixer on to low speed. And while it's running, we're going to go ahead and add 1 cup of room temperature water.
So when you're using instant yeast, it's best to use room temperature or even slightly warm water because it helps activate the yeast and get it going.
All right, we'll let this go for about 2 minutes until all that flour is hydrated and a nice cohesive ball starts to form. Okay, Julia, you can see that we've got a nice dough ball formed in the bottom there. And we want to let this dough sit for about 10 minutes to hydrate before we add the salt, because salt can inhibit gluten development and hydration. So we're just going to cover it with a piece of plastic wrap, and we'll just let it sit for 10 minutes and come back and add that salt.
All right, so that's actually called an autolyse, and it's a good idea to do that whenever you make bread.
Okay, Julia, it's been 10 minutes, and we are now ready to add the salt. I have 3/4 teaspoon of salt, and we're going to pop the mixer on to medium speed and let it knead the dough for about 8 minutes, at which point it'll develop a nice satiny look, and it'll pull away from the sides of the bowl. We get a lot of gluten development during that time. Okay, Julia, it's been about 8 minutes, and you can see that the dough is clearing the sides of the bowl. It's really sticking to the bottom, and that's exactly what we want. Means we've got a good hydration on that dough. We're gonna move the dough over here to a lightly floured counter, and we're gonna give it a few kneads just to kind of bring it together into a cohesive ball.
And Brian, as he's kneading it, he's almost whapping it more than really kneading it because it's so sticky.
That's right. You want to use just enough bench flour so it doesn't stick to the counter, and that's how you know you've got just the right amount. And don't be afraid to add more if it's sticking to your palm or sticking to the bench at all. All right, so the dough has come together, and now we can transfer it to our prepared pan. We're going to let the dough sit in the pan for about 15 minutes. I'm going to cover it with plastic wrap. And during this time, the gluten in the dough will relax and will allow us to stretch it out.
That's right, because if you try to stretch it out now, it'd be like stretching out a rubber band. It would keep snapping back.
Okay, Julia, it's been 15 minutes, and you can see the dough is nice and relaxed.
Yeah, it's mellowed out.
So we're just going to press it into the corners of the pan with some lightly greased fingertips. So you can kind of see this resemblance to focaccia. And as I work my fingers into the dough, I'm also incorporating just a small amount of oil into it, which is also going to help contribute to that nice crisp crust.
Make it taste rich.
Okay, the dough is pushed nearly into the corners. And if there's just a little bit of metal exposed, that's okay, because as the dough rises, it's going to fill out the pan.
Okay.
So we are going to let this rise right here on the countertop until it's tripled in volume, and that takes anywhere between 2 and 3 hours. Okay, Julia, it's time to make some sauce.
All right.
So at Buddy's, the crust is the star of the show. So their sauce, it's herby, it's a little bit sweet, and it's a very wonderful sauce, but it's used sparingly on the pizza.
Okay.
So I have 1 cup of canned crushed tomatoes here. And to that, I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of chopped fresh basil, 1 tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil, 1 clove of minced garlic, 1 teaspoon of dried oregano, 1 teaspoon of dried basil. So the fresh basil adds a little bit of sweetness and a licorice type of flavor, whereas the dry basil adds a little bit of bitterness and a little bit of pepperiness.
Right.
So I have a half teaspoon of sugar. Again, the sauce is just a touch sweet. Half teaspoon of pepper and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. So we'll just mix that together. Okay, so that sauce is ready to go. Now we can come back and talk about cheese. Our dough is risen for about 3 hours, and you see it's tripled in volume.
And it's filled in the corners.
Right. In Detroit, things are a little bit topsy-turvy. So we're going to add the cheese before we add the sauce.
That is backwards.
At Buddy's, they use a Wisconsin brick cheese, which is a slightly tangier, fattier version of mozzarella. Since we couldn't get it readily in our supermarkets, we opted for another tangy, fatty, well-melting cheese. It's Monterey Jack.
Ah, so it has a little bit more flavor than your average mozzarella.
That's right. So we're going to add 2½ cups of shredded Monterey Jack cheese.
It still looks a little wrong that we're making pizza and the cheese is going right on the dough.
But it tastes so right. And you want to really spread it so you get all the way to the edge of the pan there. That is the best part of the pizza, is the cheesy, crusty edge. So now we're ready to add the sauce. And the way we're going to add the sauce, and the way they do it at Buddy's, is to add it in these thin little racing stripes down the length of the pie. So with a large pizza, you get 3 stripes. A small pizza, you get 2 stripes. So,
I like how you call them racing stripes, because it is from Detroit.
yeah, it's auto, it's racing. Okay, and just to finish up the gap there, we have 3 perfect little racing stripes.
I actually love how that looks.
Yeah, the crust is the star of the show, so you don't want too much sauce. Okay, so now we're ready to put this on the low rack of a 500-degree oven for about 15 minutes until the cheese is nice and bubbly and brown. Okay, Julianne, let's take a look at this pizza.
Ooh.
It's gorgeous, right?
It is beautiful.
Okay, you ready?
That is a gorgeous but unusual looking pizza.
So we do have to wait at least 5 more minutes.
I'm actually very happy to hear him say that.
This is molten hot cheese.
It is.
If we were to try to remove the pizza from the pan right now, we're liable to lose all the cheese onto the counter. So
Can't do that.
we'll let it rest for 5 minutes and come back and cut into it.
Okay.
Okay, Julia, it's been 5 minutes.
You know, as it cools, the sauce really sinks down in there.
Yeah, we're getting closer and closer. I'm just going to run a paring knife around the edge of the pan. You can see how it's important to spray the pan because that cheese does want to stick.
You definitely want to eat that part.
All right, now, trickiest part.
I'm going to stand back.
Yeah. Just going to slide it out under the cutting board.
Woo!
You can see that lacy cheese edge.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, so we're going to cut this into 8 large pieces, so perfectly down the middle.
Well, you can really hear the sound of how crisp that crust is.
Okay, we'll give it a spin and cut it once down the center line.
Oh, that looks good. I got some plates at the ready. Corner piece, corner
Corner.
piece. There's only 4 corners, so you got to know somebody.
All right.
All right, so it's nice and sturdy, so you can pick it up.
Yeah, you can see at the bottom is nice and brown. And crispy.
Ooh, like a good focaccia. It really is more like focaccia than pizza with that crust. I mean, you can even see how golden it is on the bottom there. That's nice and crisp and rich.
I see that sauce really complements the dough.
Yeah, because there's not a lot of this sauce. Having it so intensely flavored with those herbs is really nice.
And the cheese is a little bit different than mozzarella. It really makes the pizza unique.
So if you want to make a Motor City pizza yourself, you don't need to track down a blue steel pan. Just grab a 9x13 and spray it with vegetable oil and olive oil. Make a focaccia dough and press it into the pan with well-oiled hands. After the dough is risen, top with Monterey Jack cheese and those iconic lines of tomato sauce. Just 15 minutes in the oven and you're good. From Cook's Country, a terrific recipe for Detroit-style pizza. I think I'm gonna need another one.
Now we're running out.
Thanks for watching Cook's Country from America's Test Kitchen. So what'd you think?
Leave a comment and let us know which recipes you're excited to make, or just say hi.
Now you can find links to today's recipes and reviews in the video description.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
See you later.
Alligator.